Okay. So as I mentioned, we're doing best practices from a listing point of view. Now, if you have not already done the MLS orientation and the ethics course, please do so. It will make your life a lot easier. They are going to show some overviews of the matrix with the orientation. There are also courses on the RER Learning site, which has been emailed to you. I will email it again to make sure when I send the recap of this recording. That is super helpful. Much like Command, when it comes to how to do things in the MLS, a lot of what I know is what I've learned over the 14 years of being an agent. It's very difficult to teach that in a session or two because I'm not an expert in it. Quite frankly, I also don't do all of the MLS and all of the Command for my business. I have admin that do that. So the updated changes are their responsibility. That being said, I can point you in certain directions. And I say all of that to say lean on the resources that are there for you as an agent, which is things like the RER Learning site, things like the MLS training videos, things like the Command training videos that we have. That's typically where I'm going to point you if you ask me for help. It's not because I don't want to help you, it's because they're going to explain it or show you a lot better than I can. What I like about videos when you're learning how to do something is you can pause it and rewind it. If it's a live like Q&A or a live time restrained session, it's a little bit more difficult to do that. It's a lot easier for you guys, hopefully, to learn that way. And if you need additional help after the fact, we're obviously here for you. When it comes to Command specifically, Rachel's the go-to for all things. She helps me with my Command probably monthly. Um, that being said, when you go to put an listing into the MLS, I'm actually going to back up for a second. You're going to come up here and click the word input, and then you're going to click add new. Now, when you click add new, most of the time you're going to be inputting a residential input. Those of you that sell land, you may be doing lots or land. Now, this has not been clearly articulated, and it should be. At least it hasn't been in a while. We are not allowed to do commercial real estate. Your E&O insurance through Keller Williams does not cover commercial real estate. We have 4 or 5 agents that are approved to do commercial real estate within the Metro Center network. None of them are in Richmond. They are all Northern Virginia. So if you have a commercial real estate need, ask me or ask Beth, and we will connect you with the right person and you will get paid a referral. It is a completely different process. Even though the MLS handles commercial real estate, it does not do a very good job of it. There are a lot more liabilities, and there's a totally different paperwork element to it. You also have to hire an attorney on retainer to review all those documents, which is just not cost effective for you guys. Um, Become an expert in the residential side. Plus, you'll make a lot more money. There is commissions that are higher in the commercial side, but it takes significantly longer to close. There's a lot more expenses involved, and it's just not best practices because you guys are not commercial real estate agents. Neither am I. So focus on residential. So most of the time, you're going to do residential, or you would do lots or land. Occasionally, some of us deal with investors. You may do a multifamily side of things. That would be here. But 95 probably percent of the time, you're going to do residential input. Now, when you click this form, it's going to look like this. I'm not going to walk you through how to put an input or how to input a listing today. That is, again, reserved for those MLS training videos and the orientation. What I am going to show you is a couple of things that are uber important that can get you in a little bit of like over your skis. It's not necessarily that you're going to get in trouble, but it could alter some things with listing strategy that we'll talk about. What I want you to also keep in mind, though, is you can put in the tax ID here and pre-fill in a listing. So it will make your life a little bit easier. Now, when you get to start putting in a listing, I'm going to use a temporary withdrawn listing that I have. It's going to look like this. Now, if you're inputting coming soon or active, things that are yellow are required. There's also an option to do it as incomplete, which won't yellow out anything, but it allows you to save it and come back to it. If you are listing an MLS or doing a new listing in the MLS, if you do not have a coming soon agreement, it must be active within 3 business days or 3 calendar days, meaning it needs to be on the market active within 3 calendar days. If you are going to have an active listing, it has to have at least one photo. And that photo cannot be a stock photo that says new listing or coming soon or a picture of a tree or whatever insert you may see. You will see agents do that. It is a fine, and it's a $250 fine, which I don't know about you. I don't want to pay $250 to the MLS. They get enough of my money as it is. So let's not do that. Now, coming soon is a little bit different. You can have a stock photo that says coming soon. I don't recommend that. I recommend one exterior photo of the house or several exteriors, but at least one. And that one can be taken on a cell phone. So, for example, if I meet with a seller and we sign a listing agreement and we get a coming soon addendum signed, I will tell the seller, hey, before I leave today, I'm going to put up a coming soon sign and I'm going to take one outside photo with my phone. That's to market it coming soon. We are going to schedule the photographer to come back and do all of their professional media. That will replace my crappy outside cell phone shot. But at least then you have one outside photo to input as a coming soon listing. Does that make sense, everyone? Kind of. Now, with coming soon, if you have a coming soon addendum, it still has to go in the MLS within 3 days. It just needs to go coming soon within the MLS within 3 days. When you are putting the listing in, you can see here in the top right, it says list date. That is the date that the seller signs the listing agreement and / coming soon agreement. You have to match that because on occasion, the MLS may email you and say, your listing has been randomly audited. Please provide all listing paperwork associated with this listing. Now, if you have a last name of Highfield, you get those a lot. And I don't know why. I do know why. It's my dad's fault. He does a lot of listings. They tend to audit people that do more volume because they want those fines. Not really, but they do. And those that do more volume typically miss some things because they're doing a lot of volume. So, for example, if I had a listing agreement that was signed on 8/1/2025 and I put the listing in and said 8/6/2025 and I get audited and I send that over, they're going to fine me. Matter of fact, that might be a couple of fines because I didn't match the listing date and I didn't put it in within 3 days. That's how they track it. So they will be able to see this listing was input on 8/6 and the listing agreement is signed 8/1. So don't do that. Make sure it matches and make sure it's within 3 days.
Austin,
Now, yes,
can I
go
ask you
ahead.
a question?
Yeah, please.
So when you have a signed listing agreement, say the husband signs 081, the spouse signs 082, and then Catherine signs 085. Which day do you put in?
That's going to be 8/2 because it's going to be when the seller signs. Now, Catherine does not need to sign anything unless you're using an owner opt-out. You can sign as the listing agent, just like you would sign a buyer broker agent. Most of those forms say a broker or designated agent or responsible agent, I think is the word. But yeah,
And if there
go
is a
ahead.
day or two, separation when they sign, you take the last date it was signed.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Yep. Yeah. And the same thing would apply on like a purchase agreement. It's date of ratification is the last required signature.
Okay.
Now, in that case, with Katherine's question, that's a great question, by the way. With Katherine's question, if it's the broker signature that you're waiting on, you still want to go ahead and input that in the MLS because the seller has agreed to list with you. Now, I would also talk to Catherine and say, like, why did we wait 3 days to sign it? So another best practice would say, like, if you're going to send something to Catherine to sign, text her when you send it because it typically comes through the email. And if she's not actively checking her email or if she's on other appointments, she may not know to look, especially if it's like a Friday and you're about to go through the weekend. I would just send her a text. She's pretty good about that. But that was a good example of like several different dates. If you have two sellers waiting to sign, it's whenever the second one signs. Same thing if it's like an estate sale or an heir situation where there's multiple parties that need to sign, it's the last signature that starts the countdown.
And so
Nicole, you got
also,
a question? Yep.
yeah, I do. So is it the 24-hour time period or is it going by that day? So if they signed at 11:09 on the 2nd, does that count as a day or does it go to that next day as a 24-hour period?
Think about it as time stamped. You could technically make the argument that it starts the next day, but let's not. This training is for best practices, so let's use it as like a timestamp. So if somebody signs it at 11:59 on 8/1, have it in by 11:59 on 8/4. You could make if something catastrophic happens or you can't get into the 8-5, Catherine and I will fight for you to try to make sure that fine is waived based on calendar days starting. And yet it is best practices to have it make that 3-day rule because this is an MLS rule. The contract specifies the date starts the next day. So like a purchase agreement, your date starts, if you have a ratify on 8-1, your countdown starts 8-2 and on. That's is specified in the contract. With an MLS rule, it's not quite as clear. It just says 3 days. So let's be extra cautious there. That's a good question, though. Now, these are all in regards to when the listing is signed and when you need to put it in the MLS. Second best practice here are what I call the when does the showing start dates. So expected on market date is basically the end of your coming soon time frame. Now, we've had a few agents in the past couple of weeks or months or so get, I don't want to say burned, but has had this date trick them. Expected on market date means when that date happens, your listing is going active. So you want to make sure you put it as far out as possible because you can make it active sooner because then that expected on market date goes away. As soon as it goes active, this disappears from the listing. So coming soon has now been updated where you can do it for up to 45 days. Whatever the on date on the MLS active date by on the coming soon addendum says, put that in here, the last day. I recommend asking for the 45 days. And I tell the sellers, we'll be on the market before then, but this gives us the longest window if we need it. And I would put that there because if you put something sooner, it will automatically go live. And it will automatically go live first thing in the morning, which has happened. And then you can't change it. All you can do after the fact is move it to temporary withdrawn, which is not a best practice because then if you make it active again, or if you make it temporary withdrawn and you make it active again, it's going to show us back on market. It's not going to show as a new listing, which we don't want to do because that's going to make buyers go, oh, something's wrong with this house. It came back on the market, even though it was never pending in the first place. Lynn, you got a question?
So if you have a listing and you're not doing coming soon, what would be the reason you would not put it into the MLS as soon as you have it signed?
Good question. You would. I mean, that's the thing. So like if you're not doing coming soon, it has to be within 3 days. I'd make it active as soon as you can. Now, again, best practice training here. I would always suggest doing coming soon because it gives you the timeline to get professional photos done, get any staging you need, get a sign installed, put the lockbox on, get a spare key and put it in the lockbox, do the MLS, set up the showing time, all of the things that take place with the listing. If you are comfortable or you can do all of that before you sign the agreement, fine. I don't do any signed lockbox photos or marketing until I have a signed listing agreement because I'm not spending my time, energy, effort, or money until I have a signed agreement from them. So it sort of depends there. But yeah, if you're doing an active listing and you're not doing coming soon, this date wouldn't really exist. You would just put it active. Does that answer your question? Kind of. Okay. Now, what I was saying too is like this date can be further out and you can make it active sooner. That's okay. Matter of fact, when this date is really far out, if it's a hot listing or a desired area, you will get contacted by agents that will say like, I noticed you're listing on 123 Main Street. Is it really not going on the market until 12/25? That's Christmas. That's weird. And you can say, no, I put it at the end of the coming soon period. We should be on the market next week. I'll keep you posted. My Rodney Road listing, which is now under contract, but we did this. We had a 45-day coming soon period. I think I put like 28 days on the expected on market date because I knew we were going on the market in a week or two. And then it was kind of just dependent to the seller and when they were ready. Once they were ready, we made it active. Now, another best practice, you should go active on the market. This is regardless of coming soon. If you're doing just an active listing without coming soon, this would apply. If you're doing coming soon, this would apply. When you are moving to active, go active on a Monday or a Tuesday. Do not go active on a Friday. Wednesday would be like worst case. Couple of reasons why. This is especially important if you're going to do an open house because you want that week to market the property. Even if you're not going to do the open house, Most of the third-party sites, things like Zillow, Realtor.com, Homes.com, Trulia, all those things, take about 24 hours to auto-populate. Some of them are quicker than others. But if I put my house on the market on Monday, it's typically not until Tuesday before it's on all those sites. So we want to allow that ramp up time. If you want to delay showings, you can, but I recommend going active. Lynn, I'll get your question in a second. I didn't want you to think I'm ignoring you. If you are going to schedule delayed showings, that's where you would make this no show until. So here's an example. We said expected on the market on the 19th, no showing until the next day. That allows me to auto-populate those sites, allows me to start marketing the property. If I'm going to do an open house, I can put it in there. But the showings don't start till the next day. This date will automatically sync up with showing time, which this is not a training on showing time. That'll be for another day. Plus, there's MLS training videos on that. And yet, this will block out showings until 8:20 on showing time. So if somebody wants to schedule a showing, they won't be able to until 8:20. That is automatic. Same thing with coming soon period. It won't allow you to do any showings until the coming soon period ends. So if this is blank, it will just block out until the 19th. Lynn, what questions you got? Okay, we'll come back to it. With all of that being said, you want to give yourself the most amount of time that you can. The list date needs to match the listing agreement. And when it comes to like the remarks and things like that, if it's going to be in coming soon, you can just put coming soon. And you can type out the description later. It needs to be done before active. When you're making it active, again, the yellow is required. And so you want to make sure you're not missing anything. The last little bit I'm going to talk about with best practices of the MLS before we get into some inspection stuff is this last tab, because this is important. If you want, just take a little picture or a screenshot, but this is what you should have on every single listing. Yes, yes, no, yes. And I'll talk about what each one means in a second. Yes, you want it to display on the internet. That's giving permission to syndicate to all of those different websites. If you say no, not going to do that. Yes, you want the address to display. Duh. I say no to comments and reviews. I've heard arguments for both sides of it, but I put no because I don't want a disgruntled neighbor to comment on there and say, this house sucks. It had a fire 5 years ago and they did cheap renovations. Even if he's wrong, I don't need that publicly showing up anywhere. So I block any comments or reviews on listings. I've always done that. And then AVM is your adjusted value metric. You do want to show that. That's going to support your value. It's going to show like this house is approximately worth this, which is typically pretty close to list price. By the way, it's also going to be influenced by your list price. We've talked about that on a previous training. So if before the listing, the AVM is 500 and I list at 700, that AVM is going to go up, even if I'm wrong. So it will help you. Questions on some of that MLS stuff before we move on to inspection? Besides Lynn, I don't know where she went.
So going back to the comments and reviews, is this from all third-party sites you would block it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is saying allow third parties to write comments or reviews about this listing or display a hyperlink to comments or reviews in immediate conjunction with this external or listing on external sites. I just say no.
Okay.
I don't need Zillow or Homes.com to tell me that this is a really good listing. I know it is, or a really bad listing. What this also could do is like some of those sites have algorithms that will say your listing is 48% higher than other homes in the area because it's just an algorithm that spits that out. And it's like, yeah, because it's a flip and none of the other houses have been renovated. Or yes, because it's the first sale in the last 6 months there or whatever it may be. So like you just don't want to be influenced by that because you have no control over it. So I always say no, just to block it out. Lenan, did you have a question?
So going back to what we were talking about before, so the reason that you would do a coming soon is so that you have time for them to get the house ready and take pictures and all of that stuff?
Yes. And with coming soon, remember, you're allowed to market the property. You're not allowed to show it, but you're allowed to market it. So you can post on social media and it'll be in the MLS as coming soon. So that'll auto populate some of these sites. So that's the benefit of the seller is we're starting to ramp up marketing while we schedule some of those things. And then when it's on the market, you're ready to roll. Same thing with that kind of best practice going live thing. That's why I recommend Monday, Tuesday, even if you're not going to show until the end of the week. The more marketing, the more eyes and views on the property, the better. The only like real con or negative to that is you're an extra 1 or 2 days on market. But in this market, who cares? It's not really going to hurt you if you're priced right. All right. I'm going to stop sharing my screen as soon as I remember how to do that. There we are. What is that? Oh, I don't know what that is. So let's talk inspections. Matter of fact, we'll before we even get to inspections, if you receive an offer on a listing and you accept it, or meaning your sellers accept it, you should not anywhere, even with us in this group, share what the accepted terms were. It is a disservice to your seller while it is under contract to share what was accepted. The main reason why is if the house, for whatever reason, doesn't go under contract later or doesn't close and it comes back on the market, you've now given your sellers or shown your cards hand, especially if it's under asking. Even if it's over asking. If I have a house listed at 300, we take an offer at 310 and it comes back on the market, everybody now knows we don't have to go above 310, they'll take 310. So we don't want to share that. Even though we're all on the same team, we're excited we got a listing under contract, that's great. Just share it when under contract. Now, you can tell a little bit about the story. You can say we had this many showings, we had this many offers. Just don't share what the winning offer was. Matter of fact, you shouldn't do that on the buyer side either. Just because it's not really, unless your buyer gives you permission, and why would they? So you shouldn't really be sharing under contract terms. Once it closes and it officially goes to sold, share away. That's public knowledge. From the seller side. From the buyer side, you still shouldn't share what they bought a house for, even though it's public knowledge. Unless they give you permission, I wouldn't share. My buyer just bought this house for 10 grand under asking. You don't need to share that. Same thing with best practices. I like to tell a story. Now, this is something I stole from a friend of mine who's an agent in Nashville that does, 600 sales a year. He's a really big agent over there. He takes a selfie now with the clients in the house at the walkthrough. So instead of doing a picture of like them getting the keys at closing or a picture of the front of the house or this cool Canva graphic that they made, it's a selfie of them and the clients. Obviously, get the client's permission to do so. And then he posts a story about that client that happened when buying the house. So, for example, so excited for Sharon and her new home. We were able to secure her a home before the end of the year so she can be moved in before the holidays. Thanks again, Sharon, for trusting me and our team. Congrats on your new home. Or Nicole didn't think homeownership was possible. We were able to make it happen. By the way, she was able to secure our hero discount because we give money back to heroes. Thanks, Nicole, for trusting our team to help you with getting your new home. And it's just a picture of you. You're making it personal without giving any personal details. And it's a shout out to your client. By the way, you should also be friends with them on social media and tag them because then all of their friends are going to see it. So that's some of the other best practices. Now, once you're under contract as a listing, your job, and I'm dealing with this on an agent of my, on the other side of my listing, your job is not to work with the other agent to get things closed. Your job is to take care of your client. You have a fiduciary responsibility to your client. Yes, you have a responsibility to communicate in a timely manner and to be efficient and to be transparent and communicate and work together to get things across the finish line, but that is not your primary job. This is a little bit more on the buyer side, and yet it occurred because I'm representing the listing. Do not show up to the house without an appointment. And definitely do not bring in a plumber without the seller knowing and scope the main sewer line and crack it and then tell me we did have an appointment because we booked a radon pickup through showing time. You have to be transparent. If you are going to be bringing somebody into somebody else's house, they need to know who you're bringing. Yes, you're within your right as representing the buyer to do further evaluations or further inspections. The seller has to grant permission on when you're going to be there to do that. You do not own the house. From a seller side, give permission. If a time doesn't work, offer another time. Don't play hardball. That's where you represent the listing agent or the seller as the listing agent in best practices. Now, to get into a little bit of inspection items, you do not owe the buyer agent or the buyer an explanation for why the seller is not doing a repair. You can just say, we ain't doing it. And matter of fact, the way I do that is if a buyer agent, and I confirmed with Catherine, our broker, by the way, on this, if a buyer agent submits a repairs request, when we counter, we will cross out the ones we're not doing and initial it and send it back. And when we send it back, we may say something like, call me if you have questions, but I do not need to say, we're not doing number 1 because it's grandfathered in. We're not doing number 2 because it's a cheap repair. We're not doing number 3 because they've never had any plumbing issues. You don't have to do that. Matter of fact, you shouldn't. Now, if they call you and ask you and you want to describe then, that's up to you. It's going to be circumstance depending. But for example, there are grandfathered clauses. They cannot ask you to replace an HVAC because it's old. And I don't need to put that in writing. But if they call me, I can say HVAC was working at the time of inspection. That's grandfathered in. We don't need to replace it just because it's old. The other thing you want to keep in mind is this is kind of buyer and seller side. And this is going to be a little bit more of my coaching sales side coming out, not my broker hat. From when you're requesting repairs, whether you're on the listing or the buyer side, you have to provide the report, a written repairs request, and cost to cure estimates for every single repair. And that should be on the repairs request. You can't say, oh, that's in the report. Put it on the repairs request. I write out and I copy and paste the buyer or the inspection language. I don't add any words unless I have to grammatically. And then I would put at the end, estimated cost, $50 to $150. Copy and pasted from the report. This is my coaching advice. If you are representing a listing and you receive a repairs request that doesn't have that, you can decide whether you want to tell the other side that they did not do it the right way. I have had agents in the past that I have worked with that just don't tell me anything until the inspection window is over. And then they go, sorry, you didn't do it right. Conveys as is because you didn't ask correctly. And then guess who had to pay for the inspection items to be done out of their own pocket in order for the buyer to buy that house? It wasn't the listing agent and it wasn't the seller. So as the buyer side, make sure you're doing it correctly. As the seller side, if you get one that's not correct, use your best judgment on how you want to proceed. I would recommend having a conversation with your seller and saying, what would you like to do? So you're the messenger, not the message. You can also ask Catherine or myself what we would do. You should always give the seller the opportunity to respond through you first. So if we get a repairs item request of 20 items and we think 15 of them are BS, you don't need to assert your opinion yet. Present it to the seller, have a conversation with the seller, and let them decide. If they ask you your opinion, then you can have a conversation. And I would argue the same side for the buyer. The one that I mentioned at the start of this call, I have a buyer right now. We talked through the report last night. We were going line by line by line from the Friday inspection. There's not a single red item on the report. They are all orange and blue. Blue is maintenance or informational. Orange is slight defect, and red is like major defect. There's not a single red item on there. There's a lot of blue and probably 25 items of orange. But some of them are like, there's a dead mouse in the crawl space, clean it up. It's like, yeah. Maybe put a few mouse traps down. That's not $250 to $500. That's put on a pair of gloves, throw the mice away, and put some $8 Home Depot traps down. So you can have a conversation with your buyer to say, look, we don't need to be unrealistic and ask the seller to fix everything. We should ask for the things that are most concerning to you. And then you walk through the repairs with them. Now, you can, on either side, offer a credit in lieu of repairs. You cannot, as a buyer agent, require the seller to do a credit in lieu of repairs. They have their right to repair. And on the flip side, the seller cannot force the buyer to take a credit in lieu of repairs. You can offer it, and we'll talk about reasons why you would in a second, but you cannot require either side to say yes to a credit. Now, why you would offer a credit from the buyer side? Quite honestly, it's easier. It's a lot easier, especially right now in this time of year with the market being where it is and with holiday season coming around. Contractors are a little bit harder to schedule or to get a hold of. So it could be easier for a seller to just say, here's $5,000 towards repairs and take it off the price and not have to schedule contractors and estimates and invoices and repairs and that sort of thing. From this, that's why it would be good for the seller. For the buyer side, you get a credit and you can hire who you want to hire to do the repairs. Sometimes from a buyer side, you could get a credit and then end up having a family friend or somebody that's going to cut you a deal, and you get a credit and you're able to do the repairs for less. So that's a win-win for you, for the buyer. You cannot, as the buyer side, you cannot force the seller to use a contractor of your choice. The seller is within their right to choose their own contractor. It does have to be somebody licensed and insured. If your seller is a licensed and insured contractor, you can ask the buyer for permission for your seller to do the repairs. They have to agree to that, though, because you're dealing with a little bit of, I don't want to say conflict of interest, but you get it. So I would get that in writing in permission. Now, there have been occasional times where, like, if a buyer side asks for 12 repairs, the seller says, I'll do 3 of these myself, and they're not licensed, but it may be something like, I'll replace those screws or I'll throw out the dead mouse. You can change the inspection addendum and add language that would say seller to handle themselves and then get it initialed. If the buyer side agrees to it, you're good, which I have had happen in the past. Seller agreed to do some of the repairs themselves and agreed to hire a contractor for some of the other repairs. The more specific you can be on those addendums, the better. Make sure everybody's on the same page. I'm trying to think if I had anything else on inspections. When it comes to the repairs being done, either buyer or seller side, invoices or receipts will be provided to the buyer side saying that these repairs were done. That's their proof. That's also how they know who did what. And that should be done prior to closing. And it technically should be done like 48 hours prior to closing or more, because that gives the buyer an opportunity to do a walkthrough 24 hours prior to closing and then close. When you go to do the walkthrough on the buyer side, you can bring back the same inspector or somebody from the same inspection company, if that inspector is unavailable, to reinspect only what was agreed to be fixed. They cannot do another home inspection. Also dealing with that at the moment. Not only did they bring back an inspector to do another whole inspection, it was a different company. And the buyer agent had to stop them about midway through and say, what are you doing? You can't do this. It's only going to upset the buyer because they can't ask for any of those repairs. Now, if you're representing the buyer side and you're doing that, you're doing a reinspection for the walkthrough, provide them a copy of the addendum that was agreed to for repairs prior to the reinspection. So they will come with that addendum and check items 1 through 10. They're not going to just have the report or just be flying blind. Yeah, fair question. Go ahead.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry about that. Sorry I was late. I didn't realize we were having session today, so my bad. I don't know if you already covered this, but since I have you here, I'm dealing with this inspection report now, these repair requests, and My question is, Catherine indicated that, there were several items they requested that would be exempt based on paragraph 16 in the purchase agreement. And I know that you had said, it's best practice not to share the reason why you're not agreeing to certain repairs. So in this case, how would you handle that? So if and how would you advise your client, the sellers, who are like, what should we do? Like, what should we agree to? What should we not agree to? They're also, I don't want this whole deal to fall apart. I'm just trying to understand, um, how do I advise my clients, and if they're asking for that advice, which they are, and how do you also call out, if at all, the exemptions with that paragraph?
Yeah, I don't ever point out the exemptions. That's their job as the buyer agent to understand what those exemptions are.
Okay.
So we did kind of touch on this earlier, not as much in detail, so I can kind of explain it a little deeper because you're a case study for this. You don't have to describe or even give a reason why you're not agreeing to a repair. The way I handle these with listing sides is when we get a repairs request, I immediately present it to the seller. And I say, here's the repairs request. Take a look at the report. Take a look at the repairs request. Let's set up a time to chat. And I ask them, how do we feel? What do you agree to? What do you not agree to? What questions do you have? I do not offer any input or guidance until they ask me for it. Now, full disclosure, everybody, Farah and I have been talking all weekend about this, so I know a little bit more of the details. Farah's seller is a Class A contractor. So that example I gave earlier, my first question to the seller would be, are all of these repairs something that you can handle? Would you be open to doing these repairs? If there's anything where they're like, yeah, but I feel like that's too much for them to ask, or I feel like a lot of these are little or silly or dumb or whatever, insert adjective. That's where you can say, okay, well, they technically asked for things they shouldn't have asked for according to the contract. I recommend we cross out items 1, 3, and 6, or whatever the list may be. And this, you can explain to the seller why you're countering and saying, don't do these because they're grandfathered in. There are certain things that are grandfathered in that could still be a safety hazard that the buyer may feel a little bit stronger about replacing. The one that jumps out in this scenario, Farah, just because we're on the call here, is a GFCI outlet. Because a GFCI is a safety protection, if that outlet were to get wet or any of the outlets along that circuit were to get wet, it's supposed to trip and cut the electric current to it as a safety precaution. Yes, that's technically grandfathered in based on the age of the home. However, you're going to see that asked for on almost every single report. Now, it's about $25 for an electrician to replace an outlet with the GFCI outlet, plus cost of labor, but call it $50. It's not very expensive. And so I tell sellers, like, hey, let's not let a $50 outlet replacement be the reason why we're not going to get a house closed. We don't want the buyers to walk over something because it's a safety issue. When it's things like,
What about the expansion tank, like that they're talking about?
Yeah, so that's what I was going to say. Yeah, with like systems and stuff like that, I would say use your better judgment, but it would probably not be a worthwhile repair for your sellers to do because they're going to be changing the ages of the systems that way by adding an expansion tank, et cetera, to something that's not required based on the age of the home and age of the systems. So that's where you would just say, like, hey, I don't think we need to do that. It's grandfathered in. We can counter on that. And when you do counter with the seller or with the buyer, excuse me, I understand we wouldn't necessarily say the reason why we're saying no to each individual repair. However, you can share with the buyer agent, my seller asked me to express that we don't want this deal to fall apart. Let's find a win-win together. This is their counter. If you have another counter or you have any repairs that your buyer considered must-haves in order to close, let me know. And that's kind of the language I include in there. So we talked about it earlier, but just to reiterate, buyer requests repairs and report. Your seller is presented the report and the repairs request. You guys come to a conclusion of what you want to do and what you don't want to do. Cross out the things you don't want to do. Email it back over to the buyer agent, and say, please confirm receipt. This is the seller's response. If there are any repairs that your buyer considers must have in order to close, please let me know. Also, if you have any questions, feel free to call me. And that's how I handle that.
Thank you.
Now, We talked about this earlier, and this is kind of applicable to your situation. If the buyer agent sends over an inspection report and a repairs request, and the repairs request does not have any cost to cure estimates on it, they have not fulfilled their obligation in terms of requesting repairs. You could technically not respond, and the house conveys as is because they did not do it the right way. They will look for a way out if that's the case, just to be transparent with everybody on the call. The buyer is going to not be happy about that, and they're going to want to back out because they're going to feel like they're getting duped, even though it's the buyer agent fault. So I'm not necessarily advising you to say, like, sorry, good luck. However, it is the buyer agent responsibility in that case to ask for the repairs the right way. So you may counter and use that in your language when you counter too, is saying like, hey, by the way, we're still trying to work with you, even though you didn't include cost to cure. Like, it's the other agent's responsibility to understand the contract. It is not your job to teach them. Even in my case, when I'm a broker and I'm dealing with dumb agents on the other side, pardon my language, there are circumstances where I sit there and say, like, every instinct in my being is trying to teach them how to read the contract, and yet that's not my job. And quite honestly, I'm going to come off as pretty condescending if I do that. And so there are times where I'll pull language out of the contract to extend my argument, but inspection repairs is typically not one of them, if I can help it. I'd rather it just be share with you, share with you, share with you, share with you, and let them decipher from there. Does that answer your question? That was kind of long-winded.
Yeah, thank you. Can I ask a follow-up though? So
yes, please.
When something is excluded in paragraph 16, I would think like that's such an obvious reason, or obvious thing to mention, like, hey, we're not going to do these because they're excluded under our purchase agreement. And it only would like, I would think like it would strengthen that counter,
It can.
That's where I'm like wondering, like what is even the point of it if you're not bringing it up to say, hey, like we agreed XYZ and these are, so that's where I guess I'm struggling with like not mentioning, hey, we're leaving these out just FYI because they're excluded under paragraph 16, but let us know,
Yeah,
let
me try to explain it a little bit differently. Even though it's excluded, the buyer is still allowed to ask for it. And if the seller says yes, the seller is still obligated to fix it.
Okay, I gotcha.
So now you don't have to agree to it as the listing side because it's excluded. Another way of looking at this, and it's very similar, different language, but I have had listings in the past where the buyer agent sends over an as-is addendum with the contract, which the as-is addendum says seller to make no repairs. The buyer agent then sends over a repairs request. And I say, hey, you signed an as-is addendum. The seller's not making any repairs. And they say, we know, we would still like to have these items fixed. My job as the agent is to present the repairs request to the seller because they have submitted them. Now, I will tell the seller, I know this agent isn't understanding, or the buyer's not understanding. They signed an as-is addendum. You are not obligated to fix anything. And they cannot back out because of this. So in this instance with the as addendum, the one that happened last summer, the buyer was adamant, we want these 3 items fixed or we are walking away. Because the way the as addendum is written is they have 10 days to do a home inspection. If they're not satisfied with the home inspection as a buyer, they can terminate the contract. They cannot ask the seller to make repairs, but they can terminate the contract. So what the buyer was doing in this case was saying, hey, I know we said it was as is. We're going to walk away if these items can't be fixed. So we wanted to give your seller a chance to fix these items in order to save the deal.
Gotcha. Okay.
So like, just because the language is in the contract, you can agree to something else. So that's where I would ask the buyer agent to say, hey, so maybe this is the better way for you to describe it, is say, like, look, items 1, 3, and 7, or whatever they are on the list, are grandfathered in per the clause or per the paragraph 16 on the contract. Are these items that your buyer must have fixed in order to close? Or were these just repairs that they were asking for? Here's my seller's counter. That way, if the buyer says, yes, they absolutely want the GFCI fixed in order to close, you can go back to the seller and say, look, they're technically under purchase 16 where they shouldn't be asking for these things. However, I talked to the buyer agent. They are adamant they have to have these fixed in order to close. So they can always ask for it, even though
They're not in breach of contract because, like, for instance, like if they ask for something that is exempt based on that paragraph and seller declines, we're not in breach of contract, but they can still walk away even though they agreed to that exemption.
That would be a broker question for Catherine because that's a loaded question. So
Okay.
it would probably be if they ask for repairs and you say no to any repairs, they are within their right to back out. With an exception of if the only repairs you say no to are ones that are grandfathered into the clause, that's where you're going to bring in Catherine, you're going to bring in broker, you're probably bringing an attorney and have that conversation.
Got it.
Yeah, but and so that's where, and quite honestly, I mean, my job as coach in this case, it's not broker, even though I am a broker. My job is coach, and I am always going to advise you on doing what you can to get the deal across the finish line because it is in your seller's best interest, even with these repairs. Some of those repairs that are grandfathered in, expansion tank being an exception because that's a little bit more costly to repair, but like a GFCI outlet is going to be inexpensive and easy for the seller to have done or do themselves. And so let's not let that be the reason why a deal falls apart. Even an expansion tank, if adding an expansion tank is $1,000, for example, and I have no idea how much it costs, I'm just throwing out a number. If it's
Sure.
a costlier repair, it still could be in the seller's best interest to do that repair or to give a credit for that amount and still close versus the cost of going back on the market and trying to sell it to somebody else. When you
Right.
go back on the market, you typically sell for much less because buyers associate a problem with the house, even if it wasn't a problem with the house, even if the listing has our favorite language in there, which is back on market due to no fault of seller. That doesn't necessarily give peace of mind to the buyers. Not to mention, then you're looking at like pushing closing and pushing when are we going to close? When are we going to go to our contract? So there's a lot of like fear of unknowns associated with going back on the market. So I always advise the clients like, hey, let's work with the offer we have in hand. This same thing would apply to, let's go a step further back where, and I'm going to use your listing again as an example. You get an offer earlier in the week and it's lower than your seller wants. I would still recommend working with your seller to try to counter and get that to a range that you want versus waiting several days to let other showings happen and run the risk of losing that offer in hand. Now, you may be so far apart you can't get it done. But this would be an example where like you were able to counter back and forth, get the buyer up quite a bit and go under contract versus like get through an open house or wait through the weekend. I had one very similarly where we almost lost the offer because we were kind of pushing the deadline, let an open house happen. And then we were able to still rescue it and get it agreed to. But we almost lost that. We've also had it in the past where like offer comes in at X price. We want to wait through the weekend, offer expires, and they resubmit at a much lower price because they're like, fine, that offer was for us to talk you into canceling the open house. You're not going to cancel the open house. Here's our other offer. And so you cost your sellers money in the long run. If we're trying to play hardball, I guess is the way to describe that. Right, Ann, what you got?
Sorry, it went out of my brain.
Okay, no problem. If you think about it, let me know. There's a saying that it's kind of like, you could argue it's been like the slogan of my career, so to speak. My dad taught it to me at a young age in real estate. A fast nickel is better than a slow dime. And what that means is let's not fight for extra what if money if we have something solid in hand. I'm not advising you to do anything unethical or to force your sellers or your buyers to do an offer that doesn't work for them. However, an offer written and in hand is better than a what if we could get this. The same thing could be said for when I discount commissions. Now, I'm not coaching anybody to do that. However, there have been occasions where the buyer is willing to walk over $500 or $1,000 or even $2,000. And I will say, what if I gave you half? Or what if I gave a commission credit to keep this deal intact? You can make a business decision for yourself. There's a couple reasons why you would do this. you know that they're going to look for another 3 months and look at 200 other houses, and you're going to be driving around and pulling your hair out and going crazy, would be one. Number two, maybe getting them across the finish line and through this highly emotional process will actually warrant you getting referrals from them. I have always said 2 to 3 people at 2% commission is more valuable than 1 at 3%, which, like, duh. And yet 5% or 2 deals at 2.5% is more than 3%. Which is why I tell clients, like, I'm never going to let my commission be the reason you don't get the house you want. The only thing I ask in return is that if you come across somebody looking to buy, sell, or invest, you give them my information or you introduce us. That's a better way to ask, by the way. Don't just say, give them my card. Say, will you introduce us? It's a more concrete, warmer introduction and referral. This exact phrase worked last week. I got a buyer under contract. I had to take 2.5% in order to get them under contract. I told the buyer I took 2.5% to get them under contract for the terms they wanted. And they're like, oh my gosh, you didn't have to do that. Do we have to pay the extra 0.5%? And I said, nope. You just have to introduce me to another buyer within the next 6 months, or else I'm coming for that extra 0.5%. They were like, really? And I was like, no, I'm not actually coming for the extra 0.5%, but you do have to introduce me to a buyer. They introduced me to somebody on Sunday. So it does work.
Hey,
Where are you? You're breaking up. Are you back at work?
I am.
Oh.
Is it breaking up
That's
still?
why. It was. Now you're frozen, but I can hear you. All right, go ahead.
So I have to buy right now. I put in an offer on construction.
You're breaking up again.
Then the builder came back and said 2.5. And so we changed the buyer broker agreement to 2.5 instead of the 3%.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So it broke up a little bit, but I think I got the gist of it. Nicole put an offer on a new construction house. It was 3%. The builder came back, said, we're only doing 2.5. Nicole agreed to 2.5. By the way, this is a broker speaking. If you're going to do that, go back and change the buyer broker agreement to 2.5% and get it initialed. Or, an even better practice, they have a form that is called an addendum to a buyer broker agreement. You could do an addendum and say, for this property at this address, buyer broker compensation is 2.5%. I recommend doing that route because if something were to happen with that contract and you go to find them something else, you can get 3% now. If you change it to 2.5%, 2.5% is applicable to everything, and you cannot go back and change it back up to 3%. Make sense? That was a Chris Heron rule,
Yes.
my previous broker, that he would always fuss at me because I do a lot of commission discounts when needed. But that's what allows me to sell 50 houses a year. So, all right. Any other questions? We're just about out of time. I'm going to pause it.